We're especially happy to welcome Justin Bibb. Justin is currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Urbanova, which is a smart city living laboratory to design cities of the future. Seems like a perfect marriage of Justin's skills and passions to design a city, our Cleveland, for the future. Previously, he served as Vice President for Corporate Strategy at KeyBank, Senior Consultant and Head of Global Cities at Gallup, Director of Corporate Strategy at KGB, and Special Policy Advisor for Education and Economic Development right here in Cuyahoga County. Now, if you sense a common thread in these public-private experiences, it's urban strategy. He's an urbanist and a strategist, and he gives back. Mightily does he give back. He's on the board of RTA, Land Studio, Teach for America, Destination Cleveland, and he serves on the African American Advisory Committee at the Cleveland Museum of Art. He is a connector extraordinaire. He is emotionally invested in Cleveland in a big way, and he has a vision for our city that is both equitable and prosperous. If I had to give him a mantra, it would be build a better tomorrow today. You may know his hashtag, Cle Can't Wait. He is a proud alum of our high school Look Up to Cleveland program in 2004 and our Campus Cleveland program in 2007. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann, for having me. Happy to be here today as a proud alum of Look Up to Cleveland and the Cleveland Leadership Center. And that introduction is fitting because I've been thinking a lot about the title for today's conversation, Embracing Diversity for the Next Generation of Leaders. And I have to admit, the big thing that's been on my head lately is, will we meet this moment in our city and our country? And, my commitment to making cities better truly started when I was a freshman in college at American University in DC. I was doing community organizing at the time in Southeast D in Anacostia. And at the time, it was, one of the worst neighborhoods in the country. It had some of the highest rates of HIV/AIDS in America that rivaled third world nations. It had some of the highest dropout rates in the nation as well. And when I was working with some of the kids in Anacostia, I was just blown away because here we are a stone's throw away from the Capitol building. You could see it in the distance. And yet we had the same level of inequality that I saw as a kid growing up in Mount Pleasant on 121st and Dove right here in Cleveland, in the southeast side of the city. And at the time, I was struggling with what's the best way to make an impact. I was blessed to have the opportunity to work for President Obama when he was in the U.S. Senate. And he told me over lunch, he says, Justin, your aim should be to do something, not just be anything. And over the last 14 years of my career, I've been really focused on how do we make our cities like Cleveland to Detroit to Pittsburgh more equitable, more resilient, and a better place of opportunity for all of its residents. And I would say that we are certainly at a critical inflection moment in this city and in this country right now. When I moved back to Cleveland from New York 6 years ago, we witnessed the tragic murder of Tamir Rice. And it struck me at the root level because I'm a son of a cop, and there were many moments in my life where, I worried about my dad coming home at night. But I also remember having very candid conversations with my dad in terms of how you interact with the police. And, we are still trying to figure out how do we restore trust and greater accountability when it comes to our criminal justice system. And so in 2014, a group of us got together to create Hack Cleveland. And our goal was to figure out how do we use civic technology as a vehicle to really reimagine how we think about public safety. And 6 years ago, a lot of folks thought we were kind of crazy talking about the digital divide and civic technology and the importance of using new tools to address these systemic problems. And 6 years later, we see the tragic murder of George Floyd. We see the tragic killing of Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on. And it shows us that we still have so much more work to do in terms of restoring trust and accountability to make our communities more safer and more resilient in the future. And I think this is really a question about how do we really think differently about public policy and government. 2 years ago, I started a nonprofit called Cleveland Can't Wait. And our goal was to create new ways of creating more opportunity in some of our hardest hit neighborhoods, like Mount Pleasant, Lee Harvard, and Union Miles across our city. And I was compelled to start the nonprofit because at the time, I saw this study from the Center for Community Solutions, and it said that our youth unemployment crisis in our region is costing us roughly $1 billion of lost economic productivity. And so we worked with roughly 12 high school students to give them the skills they needed around venture development and how to grow and start a business. And the reason why we wanted to do that was because we were having conversations in our community about what's the future of economic development. And I believe that for far too long, we've gotten distracted by the shiny objects. Let's build a medical mart. That's going to be the panacea to solve our problems. Let's get the RNC here, and that's going to be a strategy to turn our community around. But we got to get back to the basics. We got to invest in people. And it's so important for us to do that now more than ever as we think about the hard choices we're going to have to make in the years to come when we think about our recovery agenda as a city. And, I want to just, before we get to questions, I want to just lay this point on all of us. I was talking to my mom the other day about her experience growing up during the time of the civil rights movement and seeing all the progress we've made to date thus far, and knowing that we still have a long way to go. And I would say this, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist at heart. I believe in the better angels of our nation and our people. And I believe that we are at a critical inflection moment where we can make sure that 2020 is not like 1968. In 1968, we saw riots in Cleveland, Detroit, Newark, Watts, and across the country. And President Johnson commissioned the Kerner Commission as a way to figure out how do we finally make the promise of America real to Black Americans. And during that report, President Johnson and members of the commission received a lot of backlash because what they said was the reason that Black Americans were still fighting for equality and opportunity was because of the fact that systematic racism continued to persist. And 50 years later, since we've released the Kerner Commission report, outcomes for Black Americans haven't gotten better. Homeownership rates are at a 50-year low. Poverty rates maintain to be some at the highest levels that we've had since 1968. We have some of the highest rates of income inequality. But I believe that, the promise of America is going to require what I believe is the third Reconstruction. And our city and our country have a big opportunity right now to meet this moment. And I believe that Cleveland can't wait, this country can't wait, and it's going to take a new generation of leadership, new ideas, and a greater sense of urgency to solve these problems. And I'm optimistic that we can do it, but it's going to take all of us to get uncomfortable and think differently about what we can do as individuals to move the needle on all these issues. And so I'm happy to join the conversation today, and I look forward to questions.
Great, Justin, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's get started with our first question. How do you feel the current youth of Cleveland schools are being limited in their access to greater opportunities? And kind of a follow-up in addition to that, in addition to the organizations already sustaining these efforts, can young adults, maybe graduates of Look Up, work to provide connections between youth and professionals?
No, that's a great question. I think that, we have to do a better job of showcasing workforce opportunities to our youth earlier on in the educational development process. I believe that in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, we should be, giving kids the ability to explore career pathways. And essentially, when you start as a freshman in high school, having a guarantee that if you don't want to go to college and you can get a 4-year degree, if you want to become a technical assistant at a Eaton or a Cleveland Clinic, let's create a pathway to doing that through year-round internship programs, et cetera. Because our economy is changing so quickly. And COVID has taught us that we have to be more agile when it comes to workforce development. And I'll say this, I think that CMSD has made a lot of progress over the last 10 years. I think the Cleveland plan was a step in the right direction. But I think that now is the time to think about what's the Cleveland Plan 2.0 in terms of ensuring that all of our kids are ready for college and career in the 21st century. And high school graduation rates are a good measure of success, but to me, they aren't the sole measure to measure whether or not our kids are truly ready to meet the demands of 21st century knowledge-based economy. So we got to think differently about how we train our kids to compete in today's world.
Can you talk a little bit about how we might be able to convey that sense of urgency that's needed to elected officials and our community's leadership?
You know, that's a great question. It's challenging because so many of our residents across our city have lost hope. You know, when we have a community that fails to have public comment in city council meetings, it's hard to feel like you have a seat at the table. When you're denied the ability to vote on the minimum wage, or when you're denied the ability to vote on major economic development projects such as the Q deal, you seem as if that democracy doesn't work for you. And that's why we have so much frustration right now in our city. And so it's going to take all of us to hold our elected officials accountable, make sure we stand up and vote. We're roughly, I believe, 14 days away from an important election, but we're going to have some important elections in 2021 and 2022. And if COVID and the pandemic of racial injustice as well has taught us anything, is that all politics is local. We can't remove ourselves from the political process. And so we all have to do our part in holding our elected officials accountable to make sure they truly prioritize the voice of the people.
So while Cleveland has declared racism as a public health crisis, and that's an important acknowledgement of the reality in the city, some may see it as a symbolic gesture rather than a tangible action. What do you see as the next steps for the city, both in government and the organizations that work here, to combat the historic and ongoing legacies of racism and inequity?
You know, I think that it was a good step in the right direction. You can't identify and address a problem until you recognize that it is a problem. And I think the declaration did just that. However, I'll say this. We are a community that loves fancy press releases and fancy statements. And those are important, but it's going to take courageous, bold leadership and some imagination to really make the promise of racial and economic justice real. And so how are we addressing the infant mortality rate that exists among Black women? You know, I've been a big fan of what the mayor of San Francisco has done. She just launched a universal basic income program for Black mothers to give them what they need to make sure that their babies can grow up and have the resources they need as soon as they're born. You look at what other cities are doing in terms of ensuring that Black and women-owned businesses have the access to capital they need, because we have to do a better job of investing at the neighborhood level to really grow our economy to address those gaps. And so I think we need to be bolder when it comes to public policy in this community. And until we do that, we won't see any real change.
So you mentioned back to basics and investing people. However, sometimes in pursuing good intentions, there can be a lot of noise and distraction. That said, can you lay out the distinction of what is necessary versus what is not needed at this time?
Well, it's hard because given the fiscal climate we're going to face over the next couple of years, it's going to be hard to identify what's needed versus what's necessary. But I think it really boils down to the fundamental question of how are we engaging residents along the process to help inform that decision. Now, I'm a big believer that your budget is a huge display and reflects your core values. And as we think about, how do we prioritize investing in public education? How are we prioritizing investing in equitable transit? How are we prioritizing aggressively giving minority-owned businesses the tools they need to grow and scale, to create more jobs at the neighborhood level. And so resident voice, to me, is the key ingredient to making those decisions. And we got to make sure our residents are at the table with us as we make those important decisions moving forward.
So as we think about many of the challenges in Cleveland, the problems can seem abundantly clear.
Yeah.
But in your view, what are some of the strengths our city has to draw upon to begin this work in earnest?
I think at its core, it's our resilience, and it's our belief in the power of servant leadership. You know, I saw that as a kid growing up in the city. You know, I had mentors like an Alan Krulak at Forest City when I was a look up to Cleveland, who gave me a seat at the table and showed me that I could have an opportunity to be a leader in this community. It was the servant leadership that I saw from my dad, who was a cop and a firefighter for over 30 years. And he went above and beyond to make sure that he kept our community safe. And it's the servant leadership that I see every day from my mom, who's a social worker, who's on the line today, I believe. And she's working tirelessly right now to make sure that senior citizens across this community have what they need during the COVID pandemic. And so it's our servant leadership, but also our resilience. You know, we are a resilient community. We've been put on the back burner for far too long, but we always tend to fight, and we're very scrappy. And I think it's those key ingredients that, to believe, gives me a lot of hope for the future in terms of where we need to go as a community.
So with more youth becoming involved in government, what do you think we will see in the future for our city?
Well, I think we're going to see more ingenuity from our leaders in every sector, particularly from our generation. You know, I'm excited by the leadership of someone like Chanel Smith-Wiggum, who led the effort around Mass for Community. You know, I'm excited to see the work of, Birthing Beautiful Communities and the work they're doing to ensure that we are truly addressing the needs of Black women who are dealing with the infant mortality crisis. And so I'm optimistic that, our generation will take the mantle and step up to meet the needs of the future. But we certainly need a greater sense of urgency to solve these problems. And we got to make sure that we're bringing everybody along moving forward.
So I'd love to have your thoughts on how Cleveland has done in the wake of the protests from George Floyd's murder, and how we can work to bridge the gap in the relationship between police and our majority Black citizens.
That's a great question. The issue of police brutality has been a major problem in our community for a long time. I think that our response could have been a lot better in terms of truly, walking with the residents and actively participating in the protest for racial justice. There are great models in other communities. I look at what, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia has done in terms of putting together a reimagining policing task force to really engage residents, members of the public safety community on what should the future of policing look like. And I think those are kind of the models we need to be looking at in terms of how we address this problem. At RTA, we're seeing it right now, and I'm helping to lead a task force at RTA to make sure that we finally have a civilian review board to really make sure we're holding our transit police accountable. And so it's truly having a people-centered process to solve these problems and having hard conversations about how do we truly define trust, and how do we shift the narrative of what community policing should look like, because the current way that it's operating, it's not working, and it has to be changed moving forward.
So across Cleveland, there are multiple organizations working on DE&I initiatives.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there's not a lot of coordination, which often results in inefficiencies and dilution of the effectiveness of those efforts. How might we be able to consolidate these efforts to address the issues of racism and injustice?
Well, I think that the private sector has a large role to play. I'm very excited to see what many Fortune 100 companies are doing. I believe roughly over $3.3 billion have been committed from the Fortune 100 to address issues around racial equity in America. I think we got to move beyond just D&I programs, and we have to think about how are we putting resources in communities of color to give them the tools they need. How do we address the underbanked? how do we increase home ownership amongst Black Americans and Black Clevelanders? How do we get more access to capital to Black women-owned businesses so they can grow jobs and continue to be leaders in our community? And, one of the things I think that plagues Cleveland and our region is that, we love operating in our fiefdoms. I like to say that, we have a lot of great musicians playing their own music, but no conductor. And so we need better conductors in every sector of our community to move our region forward, because without that strategy of collaboration and that unified vision, we're going to miss this moment moving forward.
So how do you, thinking of that, kind of the dilution and the different things that are going on right now, that also can kind of come in through sprawl. So how do you think we should address the impacts of sprawl, competition between municipalities in the county and counties in Northeast Ohio, and how that competition has an impact of quality of life, education, and environmental inequality?
We got to get beyond this fact of regionalism being a zero-sum game, right? If we attract the business in Cleveland versus it going to Brecksville or Strongsville, then somehow those communities lose. It's not a zero-sum game, right? We can't have a thriving region without a thriving urban core and a thriving city in Cleveland. And we got to recognize that all of our destinies are interconnected. And so, we need to be more intentional at the city and county level of how we develop a unified economic development strategy. I think secondly, COVID is going to force us to really reimagine and right-size local government at the city and county level. And we need to be more aggressive and more intentional about conversations as relates to shared service delivery. Everything from weights and measures to our airports, to our markets. Are we really managing these assets in the way they need to be managed and generating the right kind of revenue we need for the city so that we can invest in the basics? And so all of us need to push a little bit and really be imaginative in terms of how we think about public policy, because if we don't get the basics right, our region can't thrive. And it's not a zero-sum game. And it's going to take that kind of leadership moving forward to get it done.
And as we see more minority-owned businesses starting, what resources are available to help them achieve a strong foundation and help them become successful in their business?
I'll be frank with you, not enough are available. Right now we're leading an effort at Cleveland Can't Wait to help businesses in the Mount Pleasant and New Miles neighborhood get connected to the digital economy. And as the data has shown us, 41% of Black businesses aren't coming back due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And many of the folks I'm talking to at CMB Soul Food, at Mount Pleasant Barbecue, they're telling me that we were locked out of PPP. We couldn't get in contact with the city to get access to a grant. We don't know where to go to. And, this is an issue of not meeting people where they are. This idea that, residents have to go to government to get what they need, to me, is completely outdated. Government needs to, truly be intentional about meeting our residents and our businesses where they are to really address these issues. And that is so important now more than ever, particularly as it relates to investing in our Black-owned businesses moving forward.
Justin, can you speak a little bit to our need to grow Cleveland's population, especially as we think about attracting and retaining young professionals in our community?
It's a big issue. I believe that you can walk and chew at the same time. We got to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our current residents, but we can't tax our way to prosperity. And we have to do a better job of creating the right conditions for more people to want to live, work, and play in our region. I think mid-sized cities like Cleveland are uniquely positioned right now moving forward to really lead America's recovery. When you look at our geographic proximity in the nation, when you look at our access to Lake Erie, when you look at the core legacy assets we have in our medical industry and advanced manufacturing, we have all the key ingredients. But I believe what we're missing, again, is that sense of urgency about how are we going to be a leader versus a laggard and aggressively pursuing more businesses and more folks to live here. One good example, a former client of mine, Mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma, they just launched a program called Remote Tulsa, and they're giving a $10,000 a year incentive for, Silicon Valley workers to work in Tulsa. That's a model we could replicate overnight. And it's those kind of small policy ideas that can really move the needle and really create the right conditions for us to grow our population, because, we can keep building all these buildings, but we got to find folks to live in these buildings at some point. And so we got to be more intentional about population growth looking forward.
So what might be some of the first steps that we need to take to create a vibrant economy in Cleveland?
Number one, we need to modernize city government for the 21st century. Currently, right now, I believe we have 19th century policies and practices in a 21st century, highly dynamic, very competitive, fast world. And so we need to make sure that it's easy for residents and businesses to conduct business with the city, because if we can't do that, then it's going to be hard to grow and scale and create the kind of business that we need to thrive and grow here. Secondly, what always frustrates me, I live downtown now, lived downtown for the last 6 years, but, Mount Pleasant is my home. And, when I walk my neighborhood, I still get frustrated because there literally hasn't been any real investment in my neighborhood in a generation. And I believe that we need a Marshall Plan to bring back the east side of the city. The river, the Cuyahoga River, has been our version of the Berlin Wall for far too long. I didn't even go to the West Side Market until I was in Look Up to Cleveland as a junior in high school. My dad told me I wasn't even allowed to go to Little Italy as a kid growing up. And so until we, make the big, bold investment of bringing back the east side of our city, I don't think Cleveland will ever live up to its true potential. And when I say that, I don't mean it as a way to say no more resources to downtown or the west side. But what I mean by that is that all of our destinies are interconnected as a city. And so we can't get Mount Pleasant thriving, then our city can't thrive moving forward. And that's got to be a big priority down the line.
So as we move into winter, and with everything that's going on with pandemic and needing to stay inside, it can be really easy to fall into complacency. But you seem to have that drive, that energy, that continued passion to move forward. How do you recommend that others continue to maintain the energy to push forward and not fall victim to fatigue or complacency?
Listen, I have good days and I have my very bad days. For me, my Peloton bike and spending time with family is what gets me through. You can't forget to take care of yourself. It's something I struggle with on a daily basis. Many of my friends would tell you that. And so, prioritize self-care. But I also say, secondly, get to your why. What motivates you? What fuels you? For me, in this moment, what's fueling me is the fact that, I want to make the city that I love, that has given so much to me, a city where my children and their children can grow and live their version of the American dream. And so when I get down, when I get frustrated, when folks tell me no, I go back to my why. I tap into my family and friends, and they give me the fuel I need to keep the fire in my belly. But we're all human, and we're all going to have our good days and bad days. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, would be my advice.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And that would be, as you look ahead, what is next for you and the work you want to do in our community?
I've been getting a lot of questions about whether or not I should run for mayor, given where we are right now in our city. It's something that I'm actively pursuing and exploring. But right now I'm just focused on making sure I get the outcome I want in this year's election, because this is the most important election of our lifetime. And then after that, we'll think about what's next.
Well, and I think if you take a look at the chat box, there's been a few calls for a mayoral race already. So you might have some support there.
We'll see.
Justin, thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, and all that you are doing for our community. This has been a wonderful and very fast half hour, and we are so looking forward to all that's to come.
Thank you so much for having me. Follow us at clevelandcantwait.com if folks want to learn more about what we're doing.
Great. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks, Rachel. Justin, there was one question I saw that didn't get posed that might give some lasting inspiration to folks. What book are you reading, or what book would you recommend?
Well, I just picked up a book that inspired me 2 years ago again, but it's called Why We Can't Wait by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it's been a good refresher on why we all need to have a sense of urgency, because as Dr. King said in the book, we waited too long for equality. And now is the time for America to truly, I think, live up to its better angels. And if we do all our part, all of us on this call today, we'll meet the moment. And, 2020 will not be like 1968, but it's up to all of us to make that happen.
Oh, perfect. What a great note to end on. Thank you for that. And thanks for your continued commitment to collaboration. That's one of our core values at the Leadership Center. So it's nice to hear that you truly see the value in it and all that you do.